Over the past month, I've rediscovered my undying love for Sonic the Hedgehog. I think my fondness for the series was always there, a small ember waiting to be reignited by a bigger flame. At first, Sonic Frontiers piqued my interest with its messy first showcase. I was ready to write that game off as another failed Sonic game. But as more footage released as weeks went by, my interest slowly and continuously snowballed into an avalanche. A sale went on Steam for all of the Sonic games available through the platform, and I bought the entire package. At the time, I couldn't pinpoint why I did it. I hadn't really played any Sonic for 5 to 6 years, but nevertheless, something inside me told me it was worth delving into these games I was such a fan of as a child. So I asked my roommate if he wanted to play all the Sonic games with me before the release of Sonic Frontiers. I let him take the reins for the beginning of the game, and I watched him play through Green Hill and most of Marble Zone until he grew frustrated with the stage design. I never given the construction of the zones much thought before. I had simply played the game and never considered the work that was put into crafting each zone. The retrospective I made on Sonic 1 only satiated my hunger for a short amount of time. All I can think about is how I'm going to outdo myself for the next video. How can I develop my style and create something bigger and better than my last work? This is the same struggle that Sega had when they decided it was time to start work on Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Sonic the Hedgehog 1 saw massive success, being the best-selling home console video game for much of 1991, so it's no surprise that a sequel would soon be underway. I think it's time for a short story time. After the release of Sonic 1, lead programmer Yuji Naka left Sega after disputes over the way that Sega was being run. Meanwhile, in the United States, Mark Cerny had established Sega Technical Institute in California. Cerny took a trip to Japan and sat down with Naka and convinced him to come over to STI, where many of the issues Naka had with the company would not be present. Many developers from Sonic Team in Japan came to work alongside Naka in the US. In September 1991, Cerny pitched Sonic the Hedgehog 2 to Sega, which would give them 11 months to work on the sequel. Sega said that it was too soon to begin working on the next Sonic entry. They weren't confident in Sonic as a character. But 2 months later in November, Sega reversed their verdict and asked for production on Sonic the Hedgehog 2. They ordered for a holiday 1992 release, which left only 9 months for development. The game's development was a little bit complicated due to the communication difficulties between the Japanese and American developers. Due to its short time in its development phase and issues between developers, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 wasn't fully playable from start to finish until the last 48 hours of development. Despite this, Sonic Team was able to create a sequel which I believe is just as good, if not greater, than the first game in the series. My retrospective series, Does Classic Sonic Still Hold Up?, aims to take a look at the Sega Genesis era of Sonic games, trying to determine if each title is still worth playing today, while giving my opinion on the core aspects of each game. Specifically for Sonic 2, I want to talk about how I believe it to be the perfect sequel. For Sonic the Hedgehog 2, I've decided to take a look at stage design and boss fights, zone themes and presentation, music, and special stages. I feel that these criteria are the most important aspects of Sonic the Hedgehog 2 when comparing it to Sonic 1. It's apparent from the moment you open the game that Sonic 2 is an incredibly ambitious project. For starters, the title screen is more pleasing to the eye. Instead of the brown and dark green tones we see in the first title, we're presented with a much brighter and detailed look at West Side Island, where this game takes place. We also get an introduction to Sonic's new sidekick, Miles Tails Prower. The origins of Tails as a character is actually really similar to the creation of Sonic. Another internal contest within Sega was run to figure out the design of Sonic's new sidekick, and Tails was chosen. The head designer for Sonic 2, Hirokazu Yasuhara, wanted to add a second playable character in the game, so that siblings and friends could play the game together. The idea was that the second player, typically a younger sibling, could pick up the controller and play a lower stakes character during the campaign. Tails has unlimited lives and the ability to fly, which makes him much easier to play than Sonic. The overall presentation of Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was far nicer than Sonic the Hedgehog 1. Starting with the first zone, Emerald Hill, it's apparent right away. Emerald Hill thematically is very similar to Green Hill Zone, which makes it especially hard for me not to make direct comparisons between the two. Its ground is a green striped pathway with water in the background, as well as trees strewn about, but Emerald Hill is more pleasing to look at than its previous iteration. The checkerboard pattern seen in Green Hill is replaced with these larger tiles that have more variety than the simplistic pattern. This makes Emerald Hill immediately feel more clean than Green Hill Zone. Everything about Emerald Hill is far more detailed than what is seen in Sonic 1. The trees, enemies, hazards, and waterfalls are all highly detailed and more pleasing to look at than what's seen in Green Hill. The background specifically is very nice to look at. From the field with orange flowers to the mountains further off in the distance, all the way to the ocean with the island in view. Everything is expertly crafted. Sonic also got a slightly revamped character model, as well as new expressive animations that I think add to the character so much more. Like, look at this guy, isn't he great? Emerald Hill takes the good parts about Sonic 1 and does them in a way that makes them great. Green Hill Act 1 has a single loop. How about now we do 4 in Act 1 of Emerald Hill alone? Sonic 2 emphasizes speed in a way that is much greater than Sonic 1. Sonic's speed cap has been made far higher, which allows you to break speeds that weren't even possible in the first game. This makes the loops and set pieces in this game even more satisfying. Another really cool addition that Emerald Hill adds is these cool corkscrew pathways that Sonic can run through if he has the proper momentum. They utilized 3D software to give off the twisting effect, and for the time, this was huge. The set pieces in Emerald Hill are a blast to play through. The loops into twisting pathways, into more twisting pathways. It's really satisfying to play. My favorite set piece in the stage is at the end of Act 2 right before the boss. You bounce off these 2 springs that send you over to these 2 loops. You go over a long corkscrew and then another loop, and another corkscrew, and by now you're going so fast that you don't even know what's happening. It's just so fun to play through. One more thing that I love about Emerald Hill Zone is the way it deals with its multiple pathways. A common Sonic the Hedgehog level design trope is that typically the top path in a stage is either faster or more rewarding. And this reigns true in Emerald Hill Zone. But rather than the bottom path being slow and littered with obstacles that slow you down greatly, the bottom path just prevents you from experiencing some of the more fun set pieces in the level. Take the beginning of Act 1 for instance. If you take the top path, you're rewarded with a fast shoe, as well as a loop and corkscrew that leads up to a checkpoint in the level. Now if you instead go down the bottom path, there are 2 different outcomes. If you choose to hit this spring and speed through the next part, you're sent flying up this ramp. And that leads you to the top pathway, which includes the set pieces mentioned before, leading you to the checkpoint once again. If you choose to simply run down the bottom path and stick to it, you're still going to experience a decent amount of speed, but nowhere near the amount that you're going to experience on the top path. Emerald Hill rewards you heavily for skilled playing, while lightly punishing you for taking the easier bottom pathway. This is pretty much the same for Act 2. Take the bottom path, you'll be going a little bit slower, but still fast enough to make it feel like Sonic. The boss at the end of Emerald Hill Act 2 is actually really very simple. And yes, I said Act 2. While Sonic 1 had 3 acts for every zone with the boss at the end, the sequel has 2 acts for most zones, which I prefer to the 3-act formula. It keeps the zones from getting stale and overstaying their welcome. This allows for there to be more zones in the game, and more variety is better in my opinion. I felt like the bosses in Sonic 1 were underwhelming, and I feel like the bosses in Sonic 2 are a slight improvement. Design-wise, I think they're a massive upgrade. I like the way that the machines Robotnik uses look in Sonic 2. Like, this is way better than Sonic 1, but when it comes down to difficulty in the fights themselves, they're only slightly better than Sonic 1. The boss for Emerald Hill Zone is the Egg Drillster. Robotnik does nothing more than slowly drive at you with a glorified power drill. There's nothing difficult about this boss whatsoever. You can hit him wherever, apart from the drill on the front. It's far too simple even as the boss for the first zone in this game. The second zone in the game is Chemical Plant Zone. Chemical Plant takes place on a huge factory with a dystopian city in the background. As you go lower in the level, you get to see the factory itself as the setting in the background. I love the way this looks. The city in the background is really pretty and the stage smoothly transitions to the factory background. It's a really great insight into what a world run by Robotnik would look like. It's a great juxtaposition from Emerald Hill. I know this isn't a hot take whatsoever, but I absolutely love Chemical Plant Zone. Although I liked Marble Zone in Sonic 1, it has absolutely nothing on Chemical Plant. Chemical Plant manages to keep you moving fast. You don't lose any of the thrill of Emerald Hill while still getting more of a challenge. This is in large part due to the numerous speed set pieces placed throughout the levels. These vary from steep declines to loops to speed panels and to these pipes that transport you through the level. They carry the momentum over and between obstacles. The start of Act 2 sees Sonic barreling down this ramp and launch straight into the air where you can land on this platform. The way that your horizontal momentum is transitioned over to vertical momentum is a genius way to smoothly transition your gameplay style over to traditional platforming. What I love so much about Chemical Plant is its ability to have incredibly complex level designs going in every which way with multiple different pathways while still being coherent. No matter which pathway you take, it feels like the right way. It allows future playthroughs of the stage to be fresh while still familiar. In the first stage alone, there are 2 pathways to be taken right off the start. You can choose an upper or lower path, but both sides bring you to separate routes to the same goal, meeting somewhere in the middle of the level. This adds variety to a level whose structure is pretty linear. One of my favorite parts of Chemical Plant is the yellow block section in Act 2. I remember as a kid this being where I would lose all my lives a lot of the time. I wasn't a very skilled gamer back then, I'll tell you that much. You're slowed down to do some tricky vertical platforming as the water below you rises. The platforming itself is challenging, but the reason I like this section is because of the next part. If you manage to fall back into the water, you think you'd have to redo the block platforming from below, but if you're familiar with Sonic's movement, you'll remember that he jumps significantly higher underwater, so you can build up speed and jump off the platforms to get you out of the water, bypassing the block platforming again. It's a small detail, but it really adds to the fun of the stage. The boss for Chemical Plant Zone is another pretty easy one. This time around, Robotnik sucks up purple water in order to drop goo on you in hopes to damage you. While this goes on, there are flipping platforms off to each side, which could make this one pretty challenging if you're unlucky and somehow manage to end up on the sides of the stage. Robotnik gives you more than enough time to get in multiple hits before his next attack, so this one's pretty easy. I do like this boss a lot better than the one in Emerald Hill, and it shows how the bosses in this game are a little bit tougher than in Sonic 1. The third zone in the game is Aquatic Ruin Zone, which is a water level. If you remember from the last video, I'm not really a fan of water levels in Sonic. That being said, Aquatic Zone fixes virtually every single issue that I had with Labyrinth Zone in Sonic 1. Labyrinth Zone was an unfair level that took place entirely underwater. There was no sense of speed whatsoever, and it felt out of place in Sonic. Aquatic Ruin Zone, on the other hand, feels right at home in a Sonic game. While Labyrinth Zone was this yellow and brown level that was pretty uninteresting to look at thematically, Aquatic Ruin Zone is the opposite. Its luscious green vegetation and mountains in the background, when brought together with detailed and unique sprite work, makes it feel like a perfect fit in a Sonic game. Aquatic Zone is reminiscent of a rundown ancient city that was flooded, leaving it abandoned. Its broken pillars, cracked brick textures, and falling platforms really add to this feeling. Even when underwater, I love this stage. The design of the underwater portions of this zone are done far better than anything in Labyrinth Zone. Instead of small chambers that had some sort of switch or platforming challenge for you to slowly muddle your way through, the underwater portions of Aquatic Ruin Zone keep you moving fairly quick. This is due to the use of springs that shoot you to the side, or long straight platforms and slopes that allow you to build up your speed. While underwater, this game still feels like Sonic. While Labyrinth Zone could have been thrown into any 90s platformer, I don't think Aquatic Ruin Zone fits anywhere but Sonic. I think Aquatic Zone is the epitome of the top and bottom route trope in Sonic games. The top path in this zone never brings you underwater. I think that's where this zone shines. The top path is a reward for players. There are many parts of the top path that if you mess up on, will send you back down to the underwater pathway. This rewards you for playing well. If you take the more challenging upper path, you never have to go underwater. The boss for this zone is also pretty fun. Robotnik comes out this time with a hammer. He alternates between 2 totem poles on either side of the battlefield, which shoots out an arrow. The arrow gets lodged in the other side, which serves as a platform for Sonic to get enough height on to hit Robotnik. Aquatic Ruin Zone is one of my favorite, if not my absolute favorite zones in the game, which is insane to say considering Labyrinth Zone was my least favorite zone in Sonic 1. But that just goes to show you that Sonic Team really figured out what makes Sonic fun. Sonic 1 felt like a mixture of random zones thrown together. Sonic 2 feels like these stages exist within the same world. The fourth zone in this game is Casino Night Zone. Thematically, this stage is an absolute hit. The starry sky, the casino in the background, and the city off in the distance creates a perfect setting for the stage. The use of neon lights on absolutely everything also works well to paint this zone perfectly. This is in my opinion the most intriguing zone in the entire game. There's very little to dislike about Casino Night Zone. This zone is a spiritual successor to Spring Yard Zone in Sonic 1. It uses a lot of springs and bumpers to send you in every which way throughout the zone. I think that Casino Night improves on Spring Yard Zone while still being distinctly different. While the general theming is similar, the way that the stage is designed is far from the same. The most iconic part of Casino Night is the pinball mechanic that is placed throughout each act. This serves as a fun little stop in your game where you can try and stock up on rings if you're lucky. I think that Casino Night being thrown in the middle of the game was a deliberate and smart choice. The slot mini game allows you to try and win rings. Matching up 3 Sonics, Tails, or bar slots together will net you a nice amount of rings. If you hit the jackpot, you get a huge ring bonus. But if you get 3 Robotniks, you lose a big chunk of rings. This allows you to potentially stock up on lives if you're low. There's very little downside to playing the slots. Sure, you can get 3 Robotniks, but if you hit 0 rings, there usually aren't any enemies around to kill you, so you can hop right back in and win them back. The slots serve as a fun little break in your playthrough. You can spend some time here to break away from the constant action. And the best part is, this is totally optional. If you still want to blast through the stage, you can. And blasting through this stage is pretty fun. There are fun set pieces where you send yourself flying off a pinball spring, and then through loops or pinball paddles that send you launching around. Casino Night can get pretty frustrating though. The same mechanics that I like are also the downfall of the stage. It can be pretty tough to get around when you're forced to bounce every which way. Casino Night also has my absolute favorite boss in the game, the Egg Claw. You're thrown into another pinball-like area and have to use Sonic's speed to run up the walls and jump off the side to hit Robotnik. Running back and forth between the sides and hopping off to hit Robotnik is extremely satisfying. I wish it were a little harder though. This one can be over within mere seconds. Zone number 5 in the game is Hilltop Zone. This one is very middle of the road in my opinion. Fun fact, Sonic 2 was supposed to have a time travel mechanic that would see Sonic playing through the West Side Island at different points in time. Hilltop Zone was supposed to be the prehistoric version of Emerald Hill Zone. With this context in mind, it's pretty easy to see that being true. There are very similar tile designs, dinosaur enemies, and even similar level structures. While the level tiles themselves aren't unique or thematically different, I do love the background of this stage. Being above the clouds and seeing the tops of other mountains is really neat. It's a joy to look at, and I really love the underground sections of this zone. But I feel like the underground sections are the only unique thing going on in this stage. Above ground portions have an Emerald Hill vibe, but just in the sky, so I don't have too much to say about that. I feel like the underground sections draw a lot of parallels to Marble Zone in Sonic 1. You're waiting for moving platforms to bring you over lava pits. It's really similar. But I still prefer this one over Marble Zone. It feels much more grand. Like the 2 action sequences in this zone. In Act 1, lava starts to rise as you're trapped in the cave. You need to survive for a little bit before the lava goes back down, clearing out your way to the next part of the stage. Or this part in Act 2, where you need to stand on the ground as it moves upward, helping you get through the caves. While being a similar stage to Emerald Hill Zone and Marble Zone, I feel like it still sets itself apart from the 2, by having its own unique elements that make it fun. The boss of the zone is also really similar to the Marble Zone boss. Robotnik uses a machine that shoots fire to scorch the ground. It also might be one of the quickest boss fights in the game. It's really easy to dodge his fire attack. Once Robotnik opens himself up for attack, you can hit him numerous times before he lunges back under the lava. Overall, Hilltop is lower in my list of favorite Sonic 2 levels, but I think it's still an improvement over similar stages in Sonic 1. The next zone in the game is Mystic Cave Zone. I have vivid memories of playing this one when I was younger. Mystic Cave Zone is a giant sprawling underground cavern with purple stones and minecarts in the background. It looks very cool. The stage itself, in my opinion, is a lot of fun. The stage is hard and confusing. It takes you up, down, around, left and right through the paths. But the stage itself doesn't have too much to talk about. It's very what you see is what you get. I really like the interactive stage elements though. These hanging switches that move bridges, or these green vines that elevate you down or up. These are great ways to bring you around the map while keeping you within the level theme. There's one thing that is very special that Mystic Cave Zone holds in the newer versions of this game, but I don't want to talk about that until later in the video. The boss fight in this zone is one of my favorites in the game. Robotnik uses a drill to try and get sharp stalactites to hit you. It's very simple and easy to dodge, but I think that the boss is pretty unique, and I like how it uses the theme of the level as part of its mechanics. Next up is Oil Ocean Zone. This stage is pretty okay. Thematically, I once again love the zone. The orange sky contrasting against the purple, green, and yellow stage with the oil rig in the background works really well. But I struggle to have a lot of fun in this stage. There are moments where this stage really shines, like when sliding down oil slides or going through the machines that shoot you around the level. But a lot of the time I feel like I'm not making progress within the stage. There's a lot of running left and right and stopping for elevators. They really ruin the pace of the rest of the level. I would hardly consider Oil Ocean to be a bad stage by any means. It just struggles to grip me like some of the earlier stages in the game do. Oil Ocean does have a pretty interesting boss. Robotnik's latest invention is a robot that shoots lasers, and then shoots him off an arm that looks like a scorpion tail. It gives you a good amount of time to hit him, so this one's pretty easy to kill in a couple cycles, and not really too hard. The final traditional zone in Sonic 2 is Metropolis Zone. Since it's the last normal stage in the game, it manages to bring the difficulty and frustration up exponentially from all the previous zones. Like in Sonic 1's Scrap Brain Zone, this is an industrial zone run by Robotnik. Thematically, it's really similar to Scrap Brain. It has machinery that tries to take you down. It even has these teleporters that are pretty much the same. I do think that this stage is a lot nicer to look at though. I prefer the green coloring to the gray of the first game. The enemies and traps in this zone are really unfair to the player. The enemies typically have tough to dodge enemy patterns and are placed in spots where it's almost impossible for you to not get hit. The most frustrating of these enemies are the starfish. Especially when you're going up these elevator sections, they're placed in such a way that they will almost certainly hit you once and knock you back down to the bottom, requiring you to reset the elevators by going further back in the stage. I do like a lot of the platforming sections in this stage though, like these spear platforms for instance are a lot of fun to platform across, as well as these spinning cage areas. Those are cool. For whatever reason though, they decided that Metropolis Zone would feature 3 acts instead of 2, and I don't exactly understand why. The third stage in this level is no different from the last 2, which makes it pretty unnecessary to have a third act. I would understand if Act 3 had some sort of special gimmick or theme, but it's the same as the other 2 acts. The boss for Metropolis Zone is pretty interesting. Robotnik sends out these egg things that you have to dodge, and once they're gone, you're free to wail away at him, taking him out very quickly. Ultimately, I think that the last 2 zones were pretty weak, but this is where things take a turn for the better again for 2 really great zones in my opinion. The next zone in the game is Sky Chase Zone. This stage is honestly pretty awesome. It sees Tails and Sonic working together to get onto Robotnik's ship. The stage is a cool change of pace for the game. Sky Chase Zone is Sonic 2's only auto-scrolling level, which you would think would be really bad in a game like Sonic, but the way that this stage is stylized makes it feel right in place. Being up in the sky on an airplane feels like a grand climax to this game. The stage itself is very simple. Don't get hit by badniks and the level's over pretty quickly. The way you control the tornado, Sonic's airplane, is by moving Sonic atop the plane. Whichever way Sonic is moving is where the plane goes. It's a really simple, short and sweet segment of the game, only lasting 1 act. Instead of an Act 2, there's a continuation to Sky Chase Zone, which is Wing Fortress Zone. Wing Fortress Zone is a more traditional platforming level. You find yourself upon Robotnik's battleship trying to make it to the end. Wing Fortress Zone contains a lot of challenging platforming, including bottomless pits, which aren't seen as prominently anywhere else in the game. This adds to the challenge of the stage, because one mistake and you're off the battleship and have to restart. There are a couple of pretty fun speed segments here, but not as many as other places in the game. These speed boost panels are a fun way to get Sonic moving quickly. I think my love for this stage comes from its challenge. There are so many obstacles for you to platform your way around, but unlike some of the other harder stages in Sonic, when I die, it feels like it's actually my skill that caused it. For example, these sections where you're platforming off the side of the ship are so cool, and if I die, it's because I failed at platforming. I feel that the boss at the end of the zone is actually pretty tough. Robotnik traps you in a room with moving spiky platforms. Your goal is to hit the orange button in the middle while dodging its lasers as well as the moving platforms. This one's tough if you don't have enough rings to start with. The lasers at times almost impossible to dodge, and the moving platforms really limit your mobility. Once you're done with this fight, Robotnik escapes in a rocket ship, but Tails comes to the rescue and elevates you high enough to latch onto the side of the rocket, allowing you to follow Robotnik into Death Egg Zone. This cutscene is awesome. Sonic latching onto the side of the rocket is pretty sick. It helps develop Sonic as a character who risks his life to save others. This brings us to the final zone, the Death Egg Zone. This zone houses two really fantastic boss fights, the first of which is a fight with Mecha Sonic. You're tasked with fighting a mechanical version of Sonic while Robotnik watches from the background. This fight can be tough, but it's really cool. The robot uses a lot of Sonic staple moves in order to fight back against you. This one can be really challenging, but once you get a hang of when you're supposed to hit Mecha Sonic, it can be over within mere seconds. After fighting Mecha Sonic, you chase Robotnik to his own robot, the Death Egg robot. This serves as the final boss in the game. You get to fight Robotnik in his most challenging to fight machine yet. This fight is very hard. At times it can even feel unfair. You're given 0 rings throughout Death Egg Zone, which makes it especially hard to fight this boss. That mixed with its questionable hitbox makes it really hard to fight this boss. When we're playing this game my first time around, I played the classic mode in Sonic Origins, and it took multiple continues for me to beat this one. I don't want to exactly spoil the entire fight and tell you when exactly you can hit him, because I'd like you to go back and play this one yourself. After dealing multiple hits onto the Death Egg robot, the Death Egg blows up and you're left running off the ship. As Tails watches from below, he hops back into the tornado in order to catch Sonic, who is now barreling towards the ground. And as the credits roll, you're once again met with Robotnik saying, "Try again," as he juggles the 7 Chaos Emeralds. In Sonic 2, there are 7 Chaos Emeralds instead of 6 in Sonic 1, which allows for Sonic to turn into Super Sonic as a reward for collecting them all. Super Sonic is a faster, invincible version of Sonic. If you collect 50 rings and press the jump button again, you transform into Super Sonic. Be careful though, your rings slowly deplete, and if you hit 0, you're back to regular Sonic. The special stages in Sonic 2 are very different from Sonic 1. When in any act of any zone, if you pass a checkpoint with 50 rings, a portal will open to the special stages. Once you hop through, they start. I love the special stages in Sonic 2 when compared to the stages in Sonic 1. You're put into this 3D half pipe and have to collect a certain amount of rings in each of the 3 parts of the special zone. This is super challenging. I'd say even more challenging than the special stages in Sonic 1. The moving back and forth between the sides while dodging these spikes is really hard to do. But once you get the hang of it, this is so satisfying to pull off. The difficulty of the special stages ramp up dramatically as you collect emeralds. The first couple can be done easily, but once you get to the last few stages, they give you a run for your money. But thankfully, in Sonic 2, you can retry special stages multiple times per level. Any checkpoint can be opened up to a special stage. Because of this, you can collect all 7 Chaos Emeralds before you even complete Emerald Hill Zone. While this seems a little bit cheap, and being able to play Super Sonic this early seems like it would ruin the game, I think it's a great way to reward experienced players. If you're really good at the game, you're rewarded by being able to play Super Sonic as early as the first boss in the game. Also, adding a reward for the Chaos Emeralds in this game really adds to the replayability. This added challenge adds a whole new level of depth to the game that wasn't seen in Sonic 1. Also, if you recall from earlier, I mentioned back in Mystic Cave Zone that the zone holds a secret that I was going to talk about later. Due to Sonic 2's short development time, a decent portion of the game had to be scrapped due to the time constraints. A zone that was teased in numerous magazines at the time was a place called Hidden Palace Zone. This zone became notorious within the Sonic community. People were wondering what the zone could have been. Then in the 2013 mobile remaster of the game, Sonic fans got to take a look at what Hidden Palace Zone might have looked like. In Mystic Cave Zone, there was an infamous pit that would drop players far down. This was removed and replaced with an entrance to Hidden Palace Zone. This Hidden Palace Zone is a complete reimagining of what it could have looked like. There are awesome water slides with new enemies to fight, as well as a new original boss fight. This stage is super cool, so I encourage you to go and play it yourself. It's worth the playthrough. The last thing I wanted to talk about in this video is the music in Sonic the Hedgehog 2. If you recall, I was a massive fan of the music in Sonic 1. And I hate to say it, but the soundtrack in Sonic 2 absolutely blows Sonic 1 out of the water. The music in Sonic 2 was also composed by Masato Nakamura, the bassist for the band Dreams Come True. Nakamura was hired after the success of Sonic 1 to write music for Sonic 2, and he absolutely gave it his all on this one. Every single song in this game is an absolute banger. If I ever said anything remotely negative about any stage, every issue I have is immediately redeemed by the music. Starting with Emerald Hill Zone, this song captures the feel of Green Hill Zone, but I think it might be even better than Green Hill Zone's song. This song gets you excited and ready for the adventure you're gonna go through, and I love it. Next is Chemical Plant Song, which is once again an amazing track. Nakamura was really able to capture a futuristic vibe in this song. I would argue that this is one of the most iconic songs in Sonic existence. Along with the stage, Aquatic Ruins track might be my favorite song in the entire game. The song manages to capture a mysterious and ancient sound. I remember this one being my absolute favorite as a kid. Casino Night is another certified classic. Have a listen. I feel that this song fits perfectly, giving off this grand feeling with its brass instrument-like synths. Hilltop Zone has a sort of western feel. Its high-pitched synth sounds kind of like a harmonica. The song's really good, although the loop is pretty short. Misty Cave Zone probably has the biggest banger on this soundtrack. Have a listen. This song is an absolute banger, I don't care what anyone says. This song is tied with Aquatic Ruin as my favorite track in the game. Hidden Palace Zone has another great track, and it's interesting to hear a track that was intended to never be heard. This one is pretty repetitive though. Oil Ocean Zone is probably the weakest track in the game in my opinion. It has a pretty stereotypical Middle Eastern vibe to it that I feel is outdated. Still a good track, but I feel it's the weakest of the bunch. We have another absolute banger with Metropolis Zone. I really like the record scratches in this song. It goes hard. Have a listen. I feel it fits very well as a final sort of zone in the game. Sky Chase Zone is another track on the weaker side, but I feel like its placement is where it really shines. This song sounds kind of like a wrap-up song, for when you think the story's pretty much over. It fits really well where it is in the game. Wing Fortress Zone is also great at this. It sounds extremely triumphant and makes you feel like you're pretty awesome for getting to where you are in the game. Finally, for Death Egg Zone, I'm only going to talk about the final boss theme, which is like the only song you really hear here. The song sounds super great, it sounds very high stakes and fits super well. Overall, I think the soundtrack in Sonic 2 complements the game greatly. It is pretty much perfect. This game holds a near and dear place in my heart. It's one of the first games I ever remember playing as a kid. So maybe I'm blinded by nostalgia or a little bit easy on this game. But regardless, I think that Sonic 2 is a game that's almost impossible to surpass in quality. Ultimately, I think that Sonic 2 is a nearly perfect, wonderfully crafted video game that fixes virtually all issues that its predecessor has. It amps up the Sonic experience exponentially. The level design, visuals, and music, it's all top notch. It trims off the weak bits of Sonic 1, brings its strengths into the spotlight, and lets it shine. I think that everyone should give this one a playthrough. Hey, if you're watching this right now and have never played this one, download it from the App Store if it's accessible to you, or use one of the countless ways to play this one. Do it, you won't regret it. Sonic 2 is the perfect sequel.